oh wow, I see the pelvis pushing forward early, but you really can't quantify like how much that's happening. And so in his own way of trying to solve this over several months before he came back to me was he always tried to work on his hands and arms. So he would always try to get the club maybe a little bit more out in front of his hands going back to not be in that spot at the top. And then, but the problem is that wasn't the root cause. There was an underlying thing. And then with the help of, Sportsbox.
All right, welcome everybody to a very special Sportsbox webinar with Jeff Smith and Dr. Phil Cheatham, as always. We're really happy to have you all. It's going to be really, jam-packed with some really, really interesting information and specific to the players that Jeff works with. We're really excited to learn about those, what they've worked on. And so hope you guys are also excited. We'll let people join for the next, minute or so. As always, we're going to keep the Q&A chat open. So if you guys have any questions along the way, I will be moderating the Q&A and bringing up the questions for Jeff and Phil to answer throughout the webinar. And as always, we'll be recording this and posting on YouTube if you guys want to review any of the information. Also joining us from our team is Paul Park, our VP of Business Operations. And yeah, we're excited to get started. So Jeff, before we jump in, you spent the week out at Pinehurst. Any fun stories or highlights for you?
Oh man, what a tough golf course. Weather was hot. Fun week in North Carolina, and there's probably not a better US Open venue. I'm glad that they made a decision to go there every 5 years, and with the USGA moving there, they built a lot of great infrastructure there. I mean, it feels like a US Open golf course, and man, was it a heck of a test.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was really hot out there though. I felt like a soup dumpling coming back. Thanks. But yeah, gorgeous venue and really, really cool test of golf. I was super impressed with the guys staying so patient out there. So it got frustrating. I mean, it was frustrating to watch sometimes. I'm like, how did that ball end up there after such a good shot, right?
No doubt.
Again, welcome everybody. My name is Ji-Hye Lee, CEO and co-founder of Sportsbox. We are joined by Dr. Phil Cheatham, our Chief Science Officer, Paul Park, our VP of Business Operations, and of course, our guest speaker and presenter, Jeff Smith. Jeff doesn't really need an introduction, but he is a Sportsbox ambassador and a tour coach to the likes of, Davis Riley, who recently won on the PGA Tour, Patrick Rogers, Brandon Wu, Aaron Wise, so on and so forth. He has been using the product to work with these tour players and has benefited from working with the technology and the data. And he's going to share some learnings in this webinar. So we're really excited to learn. Let me share a couple housekeeping notes before we get to the meat of the presentation. First, from Sportsbox, we've got some major coach product updates coming. Those of you who are currently using Sportsbox 3D Golf 3D Pro, you guys have voiced your opinions about ways in which we can improve the product experience, especially as it relates to the coaching interactions with your students, like being able to easily upload screen recording videos and send them to your students. We heard you loud and clear. We worked really hard to improve those experiences. So in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we'll be making some announcements. Check your inboxes to make sure you're in the know. But there will be significant improvements to the coach product. So hope you guys are excited about that. Second, a few months ago, we released level 2 certification for Sportsbox. Phil worked very, very hard on this, and there's a ton of really, really amazing information, gets much deeper into the data and the kind of coaching that you can do with the data, especially as it relates to speed production in the swing. And it's lengthier, and there's more information on there, both on the biomechanics and sports science side of things, as well as practical knowledge. So please get in touch with us if this is something that you're interested in, especially if you've done the level 1 and you're looking for more information. And then lastly, you guys have probably all heard about this, but we have released the Foresight Sports integrated feature in our app. So if you guys are interested in exploring that, it allows you to combine all of the data, so ball and club data from Foresight Sports devices, with everything that we track on the body and the club. It's quite amazing what you can discover. It's what I like to call the swing shot connection, mind body connection, if you will. That connection is amazing for really, really fine tuning and dialing in what kind of shots you want to produce, what kind of misses you want to avoid, and how you might do that with your swing. So if you guys haven't yet checked it out, please get in touch with us. All of this will be available if you contact us through this email address, sales@sportsbox.ai, or if you have any of our email addresses, we're happy to talk through any of this. So with that, I'll hand things off to Jeff. And again, if you're just joining us, our Q&A is always open. Drop the questions into the Q&A and I'll moderate. Yeah. All right. With that, Jeff.
Awesome. I appreciate again you guys having me on. I always enjoy these, and I look forward to sharing some examples of how I've used this with some PGA Tour players, and then also look forward to answering any questions that our viewers might have. So I'm going to share two case studies. The first is of Davis Riley, who I worked with for a number of years throughout the Korn Ferry Tour, and then on to his rookie season at the on the PGA Tour. We separated for a little while, and recently kind of got back together this year after the Players. And Sportsbox has been a sort of a big part of how I've shared information with him, or sort of laid out a blueprint for him for improving over these last few months, to the point now to where he kind of uses Sportsbox as a lens to look at his own golf swing for a couple of specific things. And I look forward to sharing that with you guys. I guess, Jihei, if any questions go in the chat while I'm on a specific thing, just kind of go ahead and interrupt me in that moment so I can kind of address it, while we're on that topic. Let me share my screen here. All right, so this is kind of the first lesson that I gave Davis when we first started back together. And what we're looking at here is sort of the pattern that he had worked himself into during the time that we weren't working together. And I can say this pattern is this is kind of rooted in his DNA, because this is exactly what he was doing when he came to me for the very first time, like 3 years ago. I'm going to show you the Sportsbox data, but I figured I would start with just a couple of swings here. Early in the backswing here, from this down the line perspective, you can see a lot of depth to the hand path. You can see the club head working a little bit inside his hands, but also see the club working into sort of a very shut or closed position. From there, his natural instincts sort of redirect the club a little bit up and across the line at the top. And then from there, this is kind of where the trouble starts. So on the way down, he has to go into a lot of right side bend. He starts to pop that left shoulder up. The club starts to drop behind him pretty significantly. And this is a shorter iron. I think this was like maybe a 9-iron or an 8-iron. And you could see just how from inside into out the swing had become a lot of face rotation through impact, just sort of leading to a bigger draw pattern, a lot of pushes. And this problem kind of got worse and worse and worse the longer the club. Um, Looking at it from face on, the tendency for Davis was to really straighten his trail leg very, very fast at the start of the backswing. And then from there, that sort of pushed the center of his pelvis toward the target. And that created a lot of sort of forward bend in his upper torso. And that's where that underneath sort of look that you saw from down the line stemmed from in this phase of the downswing right here. So, looking at this on video is one thing. You can kind of see, oh wow, I see the pelvis pushing forward early, but you really can't quantify like how much that's happening. And so, in his own way of trying to solve this over several months before he came back to me, was he always tried to work on his hands and arms. So he would always try to get the club maybe a little bit more out in front of his hands going back to not be in that spot at the top. And then, but the problem is that wasn't the root cause. There was an underlying thing. And then with the help of, Sportsbox, I was kind of throw that up there really quick. We could see a couple of things here. So again, pelvis swing towards the target right as the club goes into motion. So, a positive number indicates in inches towards the target movement. So you could see the chest and the pelvis right away moving towards the target. And what that caused was it made it very difficult for Davis to extend his upper body or to lift his chest in the backswing. So again, from this face-on view, early movement of the pelvis in the direction of the target caused him to stay into forward bend for too long. And that made it made it very difficult for the club to elevate. So no matter what he tried to do with his hands, take it more outside his hands, change the alignments of his wrist, change the rotation of his forearms, the club always ended up kind of in the same spot, low into the inside. And then once it was low into the inside, he just instinctually started to close the face. And so the face would work more and more shut. The club always ended up low and inside. And the longer the club, the lower it would be and the more inside it would be. Again, this is a pretty short iron that I'm illustrating with here. But the face he would just instinctively start closing the face more and more in the backswing. So if he tried to swing more left to not be more underneath, he would just end up hitting it left. So he developed a pretty significant sort of two-way miss with the driver, and that made it really, really difficult for him to play well. So again, kind of root cause here, early pelvis sway toward the target, right leg straightening too fast, pushing the pelvis toward the target. So that when he got to the top of the backswing, pelvis too far forward, a lot of deep right side bend into downswing. And then from there, it was just recovering with his hands. So to sort of fix this backswing thing.
Jeff, I have a question.
Yes.
How did you arrive at that conclusion? Did you look at the data searching for answers, or did you see something and you checked the data? What is that process like for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I used Sportsbox in his very first lesson. I had him just warming up. I had him hit shots. I noticed on the very first swing that I filmed on my phone that the club was way inside, and so that's when I got Sportsbox out and I started to look at these sway values of the chest and the pelvis, and also the forward bend values of the chest, and I could see basically what the root cause was at that point. And again, I'd asked him a few questions like, what have you been trying to do? What's the ball flat pattern you're trying to achieve? And he's played his best golf when he wasn't curving the ball very much. So with a more inline condition right here at this position, and then more inline coming down, he's able to hit it very, very straight. So you just kind of look at how underneath that is. And then so this over here is a pretty recent swing. I think this was last week at Hartford. But the takeaway, you're going to film it and you're going to obviously see right away, okay, the club's not as inside. But what you're really not going to see is, oh, to get to this position, we changed how his pelvis was swaying in the backswing and how fast he was extending his upper body to get the club to elevate a little bit faster. And so just changing this position here really kind of changed where he went at the top. We haven't worked a lot on sort of top of backswing here. It just kind of goes there more naturally when the club is less inside early. And then on the way down, the club is much more lined up, way less underneath. And from there, he can start the ball in a much tighter ball flight pattern with a lot less curve. So he can actually work the ball both left to right and right to left. And then you see much more stable, club face action through the ball in these golf swings. So what does this look like on the left here in 3D? Let's see. Kind of looks a little bit like this. So you can see there's no positive pelvis sway right now. If anything, he's pretty centered with the pelvis, but he's working a little bit away from the target. So at lead arm parallel, and this is kind of our reference point right here. I want him to be pretty much either at 0 or somewhere between a half an inch, generally a half an inch away from the target at this point. I've got players that are 0 and slightly toward the target that are really good ball strikers in this position. But for Davis, I mean, I actually had him doing rehearsals feeling his pelvis swaying 2 inches away from the target. And again, measuring it and then him feeling it was two different things. And so when he felt like he was doing it a ton, he got here. He got basically to barely moving his pelvis away from the target. What that looks like in a live swing. Again, the key for him was feeling like he was really swaying his pelvis in this direction away from the target. And you can see clearly in the 2D video that he's not doing that. And then when you measure it on Sportsbox, it's just barely moving away from the target. And then it has a nice little recentering move at top of backswing. And what that looks like, kind of this. And then on the way down, we don't have this massive sway gap between the pelvis and the chest. We have a nice relationship. We always want, some sway gap there, and that sway gap will increase gradually into impact. And that sway gap at impact is something that I look at a lot, especially with elite level players, because they're generally trying to hit the ball higher, especially when we get into the long irons, 3 woods off the ground, things of that nature. And I'm going to talk in my next case about something similar, but it's actually going to be the opposite case study. So with Davis, just again, our parameters are we're looking at that lead arm parallel in the backswing. Where are those two segments? Where's the chest, the center of the chest, and where's the pelvis? If he is pushing into this ground really, really hard early in his takeaway and straightening his trail leg too fast, it sends the center of his pelvis toward the target. And when that happens, that creates, again, a forward bend of the torso that he simply can't get out of fast enough. And the club goes low into the inside. And then his instinctual reaction to that is to close the face more. And then that's when we have sort of the two-way miss pattern. But I think this might be a good moment to pause to see if anybody has any questions about this specific player or specific metrics that anything else about this guy before I move on to the next.
I think a good definition would be, sway gap. Not everybody may be familiar with that terminology.
Perfect. So, um, I, if I was using the app, I would just throw that one of those the sway gap data points down here at the bottom, because we can kind of measure that at a few different points in the swing. But I pre-recorded this, so I'll just kind of talk you through it. So when I hear the term, or when I use the term sway gap, I am looking at literally the gap between the pelvis and the torso, or the chest and the pelvis. And in this case right here, the center of Davis's chest has moved about 1 inch away from the target, and his pelvis has pretty much stayed center, pretty close to zero. So he has about a 1 inch gap, way gap, in between those two body segments. Now, the greater that is, the more side bend the golfer is typically going to have when they start rotating in the downswing. The more shallowing effect it has on the club. You can do any of this stuff too much. And in Davis's case, he did a bit of it too much, and that caused him to be a little too under it on the way down. And from there, it was kind of a timing game with his release pattern. And so you can manipulate these variables in a golf swing. I mean, this is essentially golf swing geometry. If we were measuring someone that strictly faded the golf ball, we would probably see a much bigger sway of the pelvis away from the target in the backswing. That would create more left side bend to the upper body. And then when they transitioned, their sternum would be a little bit more forward relative to where Davis is at. It would be very stacked on top, and it would make it much easier for the golfer to rotate open and swing to the left. So, if you're trying to problem solve a ball flight pattern, this is generally one of the places I'm going to look, because the body heavily affects what the arms are doing. And I'm most oftentimes, I mean, I'm looking at this with every single player. Doesn't matter what the issue is. I need to know the relationship of their pelvis relative to their chest in late backswing, at top of backswing, and early transition. That's going to tell me a lot about what they're trying to do.
So
Yeah.
Jeff, just a quick comment on sway gap. You can also think of it from the point of view of torso tilt, if you like. The more sway gap, obviously, the more side tilt that you're going to have from a face-on view.
Perfect.
Okay. So we've got Kirk asking, what is an acceptable sway gap number at impact? I don't know.
Yeah, so there's ranges, it's going to, as you kind of master, using Sportsbox. I mean, obviously there's great software here. We give you PGA Tour ranges, so you can use those as a kind of general guide. But it's going to largely depend upon the ball flight that the player is trying to achieve. For someone that wants to hit a draw, you're going to see a bigger sway gap at impact. Right. So if we look at Davis here, impact is probably about right here. You see about 3.2 degrees of sway gap there. Easy. Someone like Rory is more like 5 degrees.
Sorry, that's inches.
I'm sorry, I said degrees. I'm sorry, inches. Someone like Rory is going to be more about 5 inches, and then obviously the longer the club, when you get to driver, you're going to see an even bigger sway gap because of ball position and the desire to want to launch the golf ball. But I can answer your question in sort of a generic term. If you're working with someone that's wanting to hit the ball fairly straight, that doesn't lock themselves into a big draw pattern or a big fade pattern, at top of backswing, I'm used to seeing about 1 inch difference between the chest and the pelvis. And then in early transition, sort of this P5 alignment, this is a reference point that I will use a lot. I'm used to seeing somewhere between 1.5 to 2 inches in this ballpark. And then down here by impact, I'm used to seeing somewhere in this range where you kind of see Davis at a little over 3 inches, could be up to 4 inches if they are playing a draw.
Okay. Adam wants to know, do you share this data with the student or or more just educate the player with conversation and, drills, exercises?
No, I absolutely share it with the player. In fact, they have accounts when I'm not with them. They're on the road. Like this week, I didn't go to Detroit, and they're getting their phones out. They're filming their swing on Sportsbox and sending it to me. Or if they don't have the software downloaded, they're filming it and sending it to me and asking me to upload it into my phone. But they're absolutely using this as sort of a marker for where they want to be.
And then, did you use forward bend numbers as a reference for him?
I did. Well, I used for Davis. I didn't necessarily use forebend. I used chest lift because that was one of the verbal cues that I gave him in his golf swing to rectify this. The first thing I told him to do was, instead of pushing really hard down and straightening his trail leg and driving his hips forward, I asked him to simply feel like he was lifting his chest early in the backswing and swaying his pelvis away from the target. So it made a lot of sense to him to see the number of, he would get halfway through his backswing, kind of in this phase here, and he would be 1 to 1.2 inches down still at this point on the previous swings. And so we're trying to get it roughly to 0 or even higher. I like it, a half inch to an inch up at this point, because we know it's going to drop a little bit in late backswing and early transition.
That's cool. Do you have the after of his down the line move?
Yes. Let's see.
Hmm. Was it a immediate aha for him? Like, did it click with him, or was it a gradual progress?
I mean, no, it was right away. I mean, he missed the cut at the Players, and he asked me to start. He asked me to work with him again. I was there all week, and so he hung around. And Sunday we got on the back of the range at the Players and worked on it. And he went the next week to Tampa and struck it well. So he was able to just kind of stay on a little linear progression upwards. And he's had to work through the feels a little bit in competition, but I think he's got an incredibly solid blueprint at this point, and what we work on doesn't really change very much now.
Yeah, I'm curious what that process is like to keep him dialed in. Like, you guys found something. Like, does he do this on the road, or do you check with them when you're there?
Yeah, so you just took kind of the words out of my mouth. Is a swing can look different 2D on video if you get the wrong camera angle, or you have the caddy filming it, or it's just something different. It can look a little bit different, but when you have a good camera angle face on with Sportsbox, the data is going to pretty much be the same. And I can show you, his last 5 tournaments, and the data is pretty much the same every single time now. And so it's definitely a reference point. And when he gets off, which everybody does, we'll be able to. We've documented what does it look like when he goes and blows the field away at a place like Colonial, and had the ball on an absolute string that week. We know that. We know what that looks like from a Sportsbox lens now, and so we can always reference that.
It's very cool. Last question. Would Davis's swing fault be his fatal flaw that he developed over time, or did he begin to hit too many draws, low draw shots, which caused his flaws?
So he has always been a drawer of the golf ball. That is his natural baseline pattern. It's what he gravitates towards, and you know, it's pretty coded in his DNA push his right foot into the ground really hard and push his pelvis toward the target early and go into a lot of forward bend and late backswing. And so, yeah, he gravitates back toward that pattern when he doesn't have some follow up there.
Craig wanted to know what were the launch and path numbers from bad to good for Riley.
Yeah, so that swing that I showed you earlier, that first one, I had obviously I had TrackMan running on this swing, and this 9-iron was 4 degrees into out, which is quite a lot with a lot of curve, and he's probably playing somewhere around 1 to 2 right when he's trying to hit a draw, but now so he has the confidence he's sprinkling in a lot more fades in competition because he can do it now, and so I think his path on a stock draw is 1 to 2 right, and his path is probably 1 to 2 left on a cut shot.
Then Michael wants to know what indicators do you look at if someone's lacking pelvis and chest turn at impact? As in, what is a common cause of somebody not having enough pelvis and chest turn at impact using Sportsbox?
So the rotation values are gonna be significantly impacted by these sway values. The more someone is swaying their pelvis toward the target in the downswing, the more difficult it's going to be to rotate open. So essentially, as a golf coach, we're trying to blend some lateral forces, some rotational forces, and some vertical forces to create a matchup that is effective for the player. And so if I have someone in front of me that typically can't rotate, the first thing I do is I look at, what's the club doing in transition? Is it in a position that would be positively affected by rotation, or is it in a position that would be negatively affected by rotation? And a lot of people, a lot of the students that come to me, their club is not in a position to be supported by rotation. So they're generally going into early extension. They're generally standing up. They're generally sliding the pelvis, tilting the spine back, doing a lot of things counter to rotating open. So I hope that answers his question.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. I think we can keep going.
All right, perfect. Let's load this next guy up here. So my next student or next case study I'm going to share is my rookie on the PGA Tour, and this is Max Greyserman. And Max is an incredible athlete. He's a bit unique in the fact that he has severe scoliosis, and it's a wild curvature of his spine, and it curves in the direction of the target. He's a right-handed golfer, so it's very easy for Max to get into left bend in the downswing, and that's kind of the issue that we found here. And so the reason that we went down this road is Max has not driven the ball as good as someone with as much talent as he has. I mean, his golf swing biomechanically is amazing. He creates a lot of force, has a lot of speed, and he's a very good iron player, especially short irons and wedges. And his mechanics sort of lend to him being able to compress the ball and flight the ball and hit it low when he needs to. But it hinders his ability to hit the driver in the center of the face, to control the face and path, to hit the longer irons high enough. I shouldn't say high enough. He could always hit the longer irons high if he wanted to because he has so much speed. He had a difficult time hitting 3/4 shots when he was taking speed off high. So that was the journey that was in front of us. That was what we were solving for, was the ability to hit driver more consistently with a consistent shape and starting line, which is a start left kind of fade, and then be able to hit 3/4 shots high enough when we're taking some speed off. And he was kind of a unicorn for me because I'd never measured another tour player that was doing this. And pretty much the opposite of what you saw Davis doing. Max essentially got to the top of his backswing. And then when he transitioned, his chest would sway pretty much in front of his pelvis coming down. Here we are like halfway down, and you can see he's in a lot of left, he was in a lot of left bend. His sternum was moving forward. I had not measured too many players, especially elite players, that were getting in this alignment right here. Chest almost, over a half an inch in front of the pelvis here. Now, with an iron, you can kind of get away with this because you can just continue to turn and rotate and drive the club into the ground. Now, this made Max on the steeper side. He would take bigger divots. He would hit the ground really hard. And Max 2 years ago had a pretty significant wrist injury. And I believe this was the root cause of that wrist injury, to the point to where he didn't know if he was going to be playing golf anymore. He missed basically a full year on the Korn Ferry Tour. Luckily, he got healthy, got some great doctors, got healthy, and then went on, got his tour card, and boom, he's off to the races as a rookie this year. Finished top 20 at the US Open a couple weeks ago. So this one was tricky. Finding a feel that gets someone's chest to not sway out of transition in front of their pelvis. And, the pelvis is swaying, so it's doing its job, but the chest, and again, let me pull up a 2D video of Max. Remember, we're dealing with some anatomy issues here. We've got a spine that is really, really curved towards the target. And this is actually a good swing right here that we're looking at. But you could still see traces of that left shoulder moving down and forward, even in this really, really good swing here. So what we're looking at here on the right is something that looks like this. So at the top, the sway values were still pretty similar. Chest moving about 1 inch away from the target, pelvis moving 1 inch toward the target. So he has a little bit bigger sway gap than Davis at the top. And I'm okay with that. I wanted him to be in less left side bend in transition. I wanted his sternum less toward the target to be able to hit the ball higher. And again, you can see now that pelvis is leading the way. That chest it's still moving forward. It's still moving toward the target, but it's trailing the pelvis a little bit. And then that allows him to be shallower, not hit the ground so hard. That allows him to be, the shallower angle of attack. He still can reduce dynamic loft and have the handle forward and compress the ball, but he can hit the ball so much higher from here. And so when you look at this impact position, what that sway gap at impact looks like is probably something like that frame right there. So again, he's in a 3-inch sway gap, very similar to Davis, but how he's getting there is a lot different than how Max used to get there. So the reason why this was so problematic with the driver is, gosh, I don't have one face on here. Sorry. Max would really lead with this left shoulder down and forward. And that led to that sternum getting in front of the ball. And then he had to try to back up at the last minute. And so you would see Max's head drive way back with the driver. And as his head's driving back and his pelvis is driving forward at the last minute, that led to generally a lot of toe contact with the driver. And then from there, all bets are off. You don't know what corrections to make in your swing because you're getting a lot of gear effect. You're getting a lot of low spin shots that are unpredictable. But the feeling that he has right now and it's a wild feeling for him, is in transition, he literally feels like he's sending his head straight back this way and he's sending his pelvis straight toward the target. Now we know that's not actually what's happening, but he has to feel that to not have his sternum move down in front of his pelvis halfway down. And I mean it's been a pretty remarkable change for him off the tee, and this is pretty recent. So I mean we're talking the last 3 or 4 events where he's really been working hard on this and seeing, just some amazing results from an off the tee standpoint. And Max has the potential to be one of the leaders in strokes gained off the tee on the PGA Tour. He's a 185 ball speed guy, can really move it, a great athlete. So he can hit it as far as, probably the top 10% of the PGA Tour. He just has to hit it in the face a little bit more often with a little better starting line and predictable curve. But when he puts that piece together, I think you're going to see a superstar.
This is a really big change. How do you, uh, how does a player adapt to the change, and how do they connect the feel? So, I mean, overcorrection could be an issue, right? Like how do you, how do you manage that?
Yeah, man, I wish he was on here to answer that question because, the first couple of times we worked on it, he was like, wow, this is a bizarre feeling. I really feel like my head is a mile behind the ball coming down. But again, showing him the data, you get instant like buy-in and credibility that what they're feeling isn't as radical as what's actually happening. And once they understand the concept and you have the buy-in, then I mean these guys just go put the work in. And so, this Max probably made this change in 3 weeks, to be honest. He had a little bit of a break during a couple of elevated events that were kind of stacked back to back, and he used those weeks off, super wisely. We were grinding on this, and he actually made a trip to Memphis, and my studio has Sportsbox Studio. So when you show a tour player their 3D on every swing, they can make adjustments wildly fast. And so having that feedback loop, because all it is feel, right? So he's like, okay, I'm going to feel my hips a little more forward. Boom, that's 2 inches of hip sway. Okay, I'm going to feel it a little bit more than that. Boom, that's 4 inches of hip sway. The advantage of having the studio versus sitting there and trying to film it with your phone over and over and over. It's hard to film any swing on a range over and over and over with your phone, but having that instant feedback loop via the Sportsbox Studio is a game changer. And all my guys come to my place in Memphis probably once a month, if not once every 5 or 6 weeks, just to have sort of that feedback loop.
That's awesome. And yeah, I can imagine that an athlete like this, once they're validating every swing with the data, it's like how fast they can adapt. What launch monitor numbers do you like to see for a player that likes it fades with the driver?
So I'm generally looking at their angle of attack, their swing direction, and their club path. And I'm looking at how they're forming that club path. So are they getting a path that's 2 left by hitting 2 up? Because that tells me their swing direction is pretty neutral. Or are they swinging 6 up to get a path that's 1 to the left? So I'm looking at sort of those 3 numbers to see how they're forming their club path.
Okay, and then Keith wanted to know, we've had the chest sway, pelvis sway, chest side bend numbers up on these recorded screen recordings. Do you like those 3 numbers mostly? For a new golfer, what are the 3 points that are most important, if there's such a thing? Or do you?
Yeah, I mean, for a new golfer, I'm going to have chest sway and pelvis sway right off the bat, because new golfers need to learn how to control the low point of their swing. You know, if you look at Max here and you say, boom, there's the bottom. And if I've got a new golfer in front of me and they're fatting and thinning every shot, I'm going to teach them that they need to create a low point that's somewhere in front of the golf ball. And then I'm going to have them understand that through this Sportsbox lens, that how much they sway away from the ball in the backswing is going to need to be matched up with the capability of swinging at least that much back to the ball, which most new players do not have. So I'm going to get them a lot more centered. I'm going to use the chest sway and pelvis sway to illustrate that. And then generally with newer golfers, there's a lot of restrictive movements in their swing, meaning they're not turning their pelvis as much as they can. They're not turning their shoulders as much as they can. New players need to essentially do two things. They need to control the low point, which means hit it solidly, and they need to hit it further. So we can layer on things after that, but if you get all beginning golfers to be able to strike the little ball before the big ball, you're gonna be winning right away right there. So yeah, I'm gonna look at chest sway, pelvis sway, chest rotation, pelvis rotation, and I'll probably almost always have chest side bend in there as well. That's where I'm going to start, and then I'm going to expand based on what unique challenge I'm trying to problem solve.
Awesome. This is a general question that we get a lot from coaches that are new to the system. Like, do you follow what would you say your process is, between in a lesson, you get somebody in, you see their sling, video them, Sportsbox them, like what like, and when does data come into the picture?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of grew up in the golf instruction world on data. So like that's all I know. I mean, that's rooted in me. So I have data running from the first swing. In my studio, there's a TrackMan on the ground. There is a video camera face on down the line, and there's Sportsbox face on running, and face on down the line. And so in the past, I mean, I've been using Sportsbox for a while now, but I've only had the studio for about 5 months, 4 months. And in the past, I would say I didn't use Sportsbox every lesson just because of the convenience factor. But now I use it every lesson in the hitting bay because it just makes my explanation, what I'm going to tell the player when I start describing root cause, the visual cue for the player just makes it so much easier to understand. Like some people look at data and they feel like it's a bit intimidating because they're not really sure what it means or what they're talking about. But when you show them that avatar and you show the markers coming out of the chest and the pelvis, they're like right away, it makes sense to them. And so, plus all the different views that you can look at above, behind. Like I used to just walk around golfers filming them from all those angles behind them. I've even had cameras above in the studio trying to get, that above view and could never get it right. So this is I have this running from the beginning because it makes my illustration and explanation a lot easier.
Jeff, I think studio, one of the things I like about studio is you can just swing and then the numbers pop up and then you can swing again and the numbers pop up. You don't have to touch anything. It's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, and there's even some software features in there, Dr. Phil, that I'm a graph guy. So to me, when I can just click it and look at the graphs in studio, I can pinpoint it. I can pinpoint where the amateur is crossing over the overlay of the pro pretty quickly and kind of hone in that specific area of the swing. And it a lot of times will show me what's happening in the 2D video when I start looking at the 2D video. And so for me, just matching those two things up is huge.
Glad to hear you like graphs.
Yep, music fills ears when you say I love graphs.
Yeah, he got me started on that several years ago, so I couldn't get away from it.
Okay, two more questions we have here. Jim wants to know, can you elaborate on what you get out of the side bend numbers for your beginners? Do you teach a lot of beginners, first of all?
I don't teach as many beginners anymore, but I will have the occasional beginner. A friend of mine will call me up and say, "Hey, I got a buddy that wants a lesson of you. Can you see him?" And yeah, come on. And so a lot of times those kind of players will be, high handicappers. But what I get out of um, looking at side bend values of beginning players can't really do it. They can't really go into right side bend in the downswing because their pelvis is not in the correct position, their club is not in the correct position, and they generally can't offset side bend with rotation of their body because either A, they haven't been trained to do it, or sometimes they're physically not in good enough shape to do it. And so what I'll typically see is at the top of backswing, high handicappers tend to overextend and oversway the chest toward the target. And that's because they don't use their wrists and load their wrists and hand systems properly in the backswing. And then they come out of transition in a lot of left side bend, and they almost never get into right side bend until the very last minute. So yeah, that's the typical pattern I would see from high handicappers or beginners.
Okay. What do you like to see what do you like to see different in full swing versus distance wedge swings?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, since we're on the hot topic of sways, that's the first thing that I'm going to see a difference in. In a distance wedge swing, we're going to almost never see any negative sway away from the target with the chest or the pelvis. It's a much more centered type of motion because number one, it's a shorter motion. Number two, the stance is typically narrower, so there's not as much side to side motion. And there's also a lot more of a premium on low point control because we want to be able to flight those wedges and hit them a little bit lower. So we're going to pretty much see if we're looking at Max's wedge swing here on Sportsbox, we're going to see the chest. Let's say that would be the top of his backswing right there. We're going to see the chest at 0 or even a half an inch toward the target at the top of the backswing. And we're going to see the pelvis somewhere between 1 inch to 1.5 inches to maybe even 2 inches towards the target at top of backswing. So there's not going to be very much translation away from the target on a distance wedge swing. The other thing is it just depends on your philosophy. So a lot of coaches like to teach less wrist hinge, more body driven pivots for distance wedges. And I like to do that too. I teach junior golfers kind of that motion on a clock system. And what we will see in that scenario is the rotation values of the body really increasing because we're taking away some of the speed elements out of the hands and arms and we're putting it into the body. And so therefore they've got to rotate the body a bit faster to generate any kind of force or any kind of speed. So they might be a little bit more open with the pelvis at impact on a wedge swing. We might see a little bit more right side bend on a wedge swing because they'll tend to have the shaft leaning a little bit more forward at impact on a wedge swing. So those are a couple things that come to mind that you'd see kinematically different on a wedge swing and also from a measurement standpoint different.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'm picking up from hearing you speak is I think it's really important to just look at a lot of different swings and figure out what what the ranges are. Like the more swings you look at on Sportsbox, you kind of figure out like what is normal, what is good, what is bad, what is good for this type of club versus that. But yeah.
Yeah. And so I've sort of cataloged. I coach a lot of high level players, a lot of college players, professional players, and I've sort of cataloged Sportsbox screen recordings, if you will, for these players, and I've kind of created a fade folder and a draw folder, a high ball folder, a low ball folder, and you'd be astonished at how similar these movement patterns are when they're hitting the same shot. It doesn't matter, and they can have wildly different anatomy. So, like if I compare Patrick, Rogers, and Max, I mean Patrick's like 6'2" with super long legs and short arms, and Max is like 5'10". But man, if they're both hitting a stock fade, they look identical at impact. And from a side bend, a rotation value standpoint, they look almost identical. And then vice versa, when they both hit a draw, they look less rotated open, more side bent. So the patterns become pretty clear when you start measuring a bunch of different golfers and kind of cataloging them, if you will.
That's really cool. All right, we've got one more question from Michael. Have you used Sportsbox for elite players to generate more speed? So like speed training, what key indicators would you look at?
Yeah, that's another great question. So I haven't to be quite honest, I haven't used Sportsbox a lot for that purpose. I do have some speed protocols that I will put players through, and typically I'm just using TrackMan for that. I'm generally talking a bit more about how to use the ground, different ground reaction forces. One thing that will change, if you see that tempo number there on Sportsbox, is I will manipulate that quite a bit. I will speed the backswing up like crazy if I'm trying to get a player to hit their driver further, so that they have to learn to decelerate that backswing velocity and create a bigger stretch, shortening cycle in transition. So that's one thing that I will look at on Sportsbox, but I haven't used it, honestly enough for that purpose probably.
Yeah, Phil, maybe you can chime in here because we've done some research on motion data relating to speed production.
Yeah, we just recently did a presentation on our speed profile. And if I may share the screen for just a second, can I take it away from you? There it is.
By the way, really, really fascinating stuff and awesome to see the success of your players, Jeff.
Thank you.
So Jeff, you may have seen this, but if you haven't, it's something we can talk about in the future. We've created a speed report, a speed profile, where we've got 5 boxes of different Sportsbox parameters that we measure, Sportsbox indicators, if you like. We have rotational range of motion, so chest turn max, pelvis turn max, X factor max. Then we have rotational speeds, which come from the kinematic sequence. Those are the max speeds. And then we have, of course, horizontals. So we have rotation, horizontals, and verticals. And we also look at release characteristics. And so just briefly, those are like 15 different variables that we come up with our speed report. And we compare the Tour Pro. This is based on 55 Tour Pros. So if you see your numbers high in here, then you're doing really, really good. It's very specific to the Tour Pros. But it gives you an idea quickly what your percentile ranking is. This actually was Bryson DeChambeau's speed report. And you see that, wow, he's way high on chest turn, pelvis turn, X factor, and certainly really high on speeds, rotational speeds. So he actually releases a little bit earlier, but that's more because he's trying to control the shot shape that he's looking for. And he has a high hand speed. So yeah, with Sportsbox, these numbers are available directly as indicators in Sportsbox. So you don't have to have this speed report. You can look at these numbers directly.
Bill, what's the fastest hand speed you've seen?
It's pretty like look at that. It's at Bryson is 25.6 and he's 92nd percentile. That only that means that only since it was 55, only 3 or 4 guys are faster than him. So you're looking at 26 miles per hour, perhaps. I don't know what you've seen, but
Yeah.
somewhere
Yeah,
around there.
I actually had Kyle Westmoreland in my studio yesterday on this exact thing, and he was 28 miles an hour.
Oh my, wow,
Um,
that's definitely
about
an effort.
about 130, 34 miles an hour club head speed on TrackMan. So
And the other thing you got to remember with hand speed is it doesn't max out at impact. It's part of the kinematic sequence. And it would be the same timing as the lead arm swing speed. It peaks out, and you can see we've got some numbers here, time before impact, about 60 milliseconds for men and about 80 milliseconds for women. So yeah, it's got to decelerate because the club's got to release into impact. So there's a lot of cool stuff in there, and we're looking more and more at the speed stuff as well, and we'll be looking at direction as well next.
All right, well, we're at time. Unfortunately, I feel like we could talk about this stuff forever and ever, but we will wrap this up for now. Again, thanks everybody, and thank you, Jeff, for providing all this great information and sharing knowledge with all of us. And Phil, thank you for being here and sharing your knowledge. And thanks everybody for joining. This was fun. And we'll post this on YouTube in a couple days, and you guys will get notifications about it. All right. Thanks, everybody.
thank
Have a
you.
good night.